Welcome to the third mini-lecture for Understanding the Social World. In the last mini-lecture, we looked in greater depth at the sociological imagination, a lens through which we can examine the interconnection between the private troubles of individuals and the public issues of the social world. In this mini-lecture, we introduce three new lenses, or sociological paradigms. What are paradigms? Put simply, a paradigm is a way of seeing the social world that is shared by certain theorists. We group these theorists together based on their particular way of seeing the world, because they often share assumptions or beliefs about how society works. Functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism are three paradigms that have been highly influential in sociology. They are not the only sociological paradigms that exist, but broadly speaking, the history of sociology as we know it today has developed on the foundation of these three. These paradigms are the next tools you will place in your toolbox, alongside your sociological imagination. A new set of lenses that you can look through to examine the workings of society. We start with functionalism. This paradigm views society holistically. To do this, functionalism takes a broad view of the world, looking through a wide-angle lens. To a functionalist, society is like a living organism in which each part serves specific functions that contribute to the survival or benefit of the whole. Society then is organised in such a way that, for the most part, social order is maintained and everything works well. But, just like a living organism, things can go wrong. These are dysfunctions that will either disappear over time, like a body getting well again after a short bout of flu, or they actually contribute some benefit that isn't immediately visible. Functionalist research may be directed towards revealing these hidden benefits, demonstrating how apparent social dysfunctions serve a valuable purpose in our society. Auguste Comte, who actually gave sociology its name in the 19th century, is considered the founding father of functionalism. Comte was a French sociologist writing about France after the French Revolution. He followed the lead of natural scientists, like physicists, who discovered that the physical world has natural laws, like the law of conservation of energy. Comte hoped that the systematic study of the social world through the science of sociology would reveal basic laws of society. How can we use a functionalist perspective? Last week, we used our sociological imaginations to look between the private troubles and public issues of unemployment. A functionalist perspective would take the whole of society into account as a living thing, and living things grow and change over time. The unemployment of some people might suggest that society is undergoing changes. For example, technological developments that make some jobs redundant and open up new fields for people to work in. A functionalist can then see personal troubles as part of the working of society as a whole. Unemployment, however terrible this might be for an individual, might be viewed as a function of a changing society. A sociologist working from within the functionalist paradigm might ask, what keeps society running smoothly? What are the different parts of society, and how do they relate to one another? What are the intended and unintended outcomes of an event? There are, of course, criticisms of the functionalist paradigm. An important criticism is that the functionalist view of society as a body in balance, despite its dysfunctions, supports things the way they are. It doesn't effectively critique significant public issues, suggesting that things will eventually change on their own, that society will find a balance. For some, this is unacceptable. Social issues like homelessness, race relations, and gender relations are urgent concerns with immediate consequences. Critics of the functionalist paradigm argue that letting society find its own balance is just not good enough when there are people sleeping on the streets, suffering countless forms of discrimination due to the colour of their skin, or being paid cents on the dollar for identical work just for being a woman. In contrast to functionalism, we then have conflict theory, another paradigm that takes a broad view of the social world using a wide-angle lens. Where functionalism views society as a body, conflict theory sees society as a constant struggle. What do we struggle over? Resources like housing, money, food, access to services, and political representation. Although the name conflict theory might suggest violence, these struggles aren't always matters of bloodshed. The unionisation of workers to negotiate with their employers for higher wages and better working conditions is a form of social struggle, a tension between competing groups. Workers want fair pay and safe conditions, while employers want to maximise productivity and profit. The resulting tension is a part of what makes up the running of society. For conflict theorists, struggles are everywhere. Karl Marx is considered the founding father of conflict theory. Marx wrote in the 1800s about the struggles of workers under capitalism. For Marx, capitalism pits the proletariat, that is, the class of wage earners, in a struggle with the bourgeoisie, the smaller class who own the means of production. Because the bourgeoisie own the means of production, factories, tools, machineries, infrastructure and resources, the proletariat's only value is in their labour, the work they put in to produce what the bourgeoisie wants. This is a struggle because the proletariat wants to be paid as much as possible for their work, and the bourgeoisie wants to pay as little as possible for that work. A sociologist working from within the conflict theory paradigm might ask, how are wealth and power distributed in society? How do people with wealth and power keep them? Are there groups that get ahead in this society, and why? How are society's resources and opportunities divided? Like functionalism, there are criticisms of conflict theory too. The main criticism is that conflict theory is too radical. Early in 2016, for example, in the Australian political sphere, Cory Bernardi, a Conservative senator, accused a national anti-bullying program aimed at stamping out homophobia and transphobia in schools of indoctrinating kids with a Marxist agenda of social relativism. This is shorthand for teaching children to challenge the status quo with alternative social structures that are supposedly also valid. It is only really an insult from a position of power, a position that would supposedly be challenged by a Marxist agenda. Because conflict theorists see social inequality as a negative thing, it is argued by critics of the paradigm that conflict theory overlooks the benefits that arise from healthy competition. Doesn't competing against others drive us to be our best? The final paradigm we'll introduce in this mini lecture is called symbolic interactionism. This paradigm is interested in the way the social world we live in is created through communication with one another. Because of this, it takes a narrow view of society using a zoom lens. Unlike the functionalist and conflict theory perspectives, the symbolic interactionist paradigm isn't so interested in large-scale, society-wide analyses. Instead, it focuses on everyday interactions between people to explain the social world. Symbolic interactionists view the world as made up of meaningful objects, including other people, actions, material things, and relationships. All of these meaningful objects hold a shared symbolic meaning for us, and it is our ability to use this shared meaning that produces the social world. Everything can be symbolic or be made symbolic, and sociologists working in the symbolic interactionist paradigm are interested in the way we create the society we live in from these symbols through our social interactions. By agreeing on shared meanings, the most obvious of which is language, we thus create social order. George Herbert Mead is considered the father of symbolic interactionism. Unlike the French Comte and the German Marx, Mead was an American sociologist writing in the late 1920s and very early 1930s. He died in 1931. For Mead, human development and the meaning we give everyday things are social processes. They involve the interaction of multiple individuals. It is through our interaction with individuals that we learn the shared meanings of symbols in our society, and in this way we construct an idea of self. How could you have an idea of yourself without the concept of a self, learned through social interaction? Without the words you, I, me, my, and self, without a body to assign meaning, a body that is yours and not someone else's, through the everyday interactions you experience, you develop an idea of who you are. You develop a personality. The individual for Mead is never separate from society. Indeed, it is formed by its very interactions with society. You would not even have an understanding of the concept of individuality without a society made up of other people to produce it and pass it on to you. A sociologist working from within the symbolic interactionist paradigm might ask, how do people co-create their society? How does social interaction influence, create and sustain human relationships? Do people change behaviour from one setting to another, and if so, why? Again, there are criticisms of symbolic interactionism. A primary criticism is that because symbolic interactionism is focused on communication between individuals, it can't carry out the same kind of society-wide analyses as functionalism and conflict theory. Further, because the social world is created by individuals, it grants too much agency, that is, too much free will to people. Surely we can't change the world just by changing how we understand symbols. And there you have it. 3 new sociological tools to play with and 3 new ways of looking at the social world. I am aware too that I haven't counted any of the criticisms of these 3 paradigms here. I've done this on purpose. Over the coming weeks, we will explore the strengths and weaknesses of these sociological paradigms, and you can develop your own position in relation to each of them. Sociology is a broad church, and sociologists will have their own preferences for conducting examinations of the social world. You too will have an opportunity to develop your preferred way of seeing, informed by sociological theory.